Everyone is vulnerable to being pinned when life plays hardball, whether it is a physical or mental health condition. No one can stand alone. For those who are not pinned, appreciate that it could be you or loved one someday. So when you see a chance to help someone, please do. They are not weak, they are pinned. Even a slight hand up and a listening ear can begin seriously lightening the load, change, or save a life. Help end stigma. Move from being pinned to purpose. Time for a hand up.
Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Moore. I'm the founder of the Pin to Purpose initiative and this Pin to Purpose podcast. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you today to Peter Mayfield, our guest, who is founder of Nature Up Health and has been promoting nature for kids for an incredibly long time, is a world-class climber. I'm actually going to read a bit more about his bio in a second, but he is a true Renaissance man, and he's become a friend too. We're both ambassadors with the Real Mental Health Foundation, and shout out to Sean Lesser. But today we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion and talk a bit about his own journey and what he's been doing to help out a huge number of kids. So just to read a tiny bit of a bio, and then I'll pass it over to Peter to introduce himself more. Peter is the founder of Nature Up Health, a consulting design firm specializing in helping organizations design and implement innovative, clinically supervised, nature-based therapeutic mentoring programs and healing landscapes. He brings this expertise to cities and communities across the country, helping agencies, schools, and developers integrate nature-based healing in their programs and spaces. And over his 40-year career as a leader in the field of embodied peak experience, as a world-class climber, and looking forward to talking more about some of those experiences. He's guided thousands through transformative adventures in mountains and wild places, and he's the chief guide of the Yosemite Engineering School and founded City Rock, one of the world's first full-service climbing gyms. And his mission, simple: to help people heal, learn, and thrive through the power of nature. It's really a great pleasure to have Peter join us today. And why don't I pass it over to you to say a few words to further introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm talking to you from Donner Summit. I live at like 2,100 meters in the High Sierra, and it's a beautiful evening, seeing the alpenglow light across out my office window at Donner Peak. And I've been gone for a week, so it's wonderful to be back home in the mountains. And I guess what you hear from my bio is I really had a long devotion to life in the mountains and turning other people on to the benefits of that, and plenty of time doing that in the beautiful nature that is in almost everywhere there's nature. So even though I've been blessed and privileged to be in these spectacular places like Yosemite for many years, I'm always really encouraging people, like, find that little beautiful spot down the block from where you live that the sun hits in the morning and you can stand there and breathe and watch the leaves shimmering and hear the bird song. And so much increasing research now about what that does to your brain and how good it is for us to take in nature a little bit every day, or as much as we can.
No, it's incredible. It's beautiful. And, this podcast was created initially through, my own lived experience and thoughts of trying to help contribute towards eliminating stigma and giving people a hand up on their healing journeys. So I wanted to ask you, at the outset, you have been a prolific climber and a prodigy since a very young age. And so, you had tremendous mental strength and focus and have that to be able to do that. But maybe you can talk a little bit about, your early days and what climbing meant.
Sure. Yeah. And so I was adopted and at birth and placed with a wonderful couple. This is in 1962, long ago. And I was the oldest of four adopted kids. And my parents were wonderful in that they really supported each of us following our following our bliss, following our interests. Like my parents had no relationship really to nature. My dad served in Korea. He was a psychiatrist actually, and in the old school way of being a psychiatrist, he was a Jungian analyst. He did like deep healing work with people, deep analysis. And he said, "Oh, I slept in a tent for 2 years in Korea. That's enough." But um, I think they could tell I had a thing for moving, being really active outside. And when I was 6 years old, they said, "Hey, these friends of ours are going skiing," and they asked if you wanted to join. And I'm like, "Sure." And just at dark 30 at 5 a.m. or something, I just jumped into the back of these people's car I'd never met, and they drove me up to Tahoe. And I love skiing. And that was just alpine skiing, 1968, leather boots and all that. And in that same program, so then I skied all the time, and from 6 to 9, and was in a ski club. And they offered a summer program that was just some other person, group they knew. And it was quite adventurous. It wasn't summer camp. It was like show up with this intense equipment list at the base of a ski resort in Tahoe. And I'm just like this little 9-year-old, but we just backpacked up and made a base camp up over the ridge. And it's pretty hard hike that I remember well. And during that week, they took us rock climbing, and I actually have a photo of that day. There was a black and white photo of my first time rock climbing. I was 9 years old, and I loved it. I found it scary, but I really loved it. And my parents divorced. We were living in Sacramento. My father moved to Berkeley, and I was so lucky that in the Berkeley Hills, right below his house, were these practice rocks. In the Sierra Club rock climbing section of the Bay Area had this place in history, in the history of mountaineering, where I think it started in 1931 by Richard Leonard, and he accomplished the first sort of modern technical rock climb. At the time, the most intense technical climb in the world, probably, to do the first ascent of Lower Cathedral Spire. And I got to know him. The Sierra Club stored all the gear in his garage, and every Sunday there was a free rock climbing outing, and I would just go 2 blocks down below my house, ring his doorbell, "Hi, Mr. Leonard," and he'd open the garage, and he and I would unload all the gear and put it in the driveway, and whoever was leading that Sunday's climb for the rock climbing section would pull up, and I'd load it in the car and jump in.
And and
So I got so into it.
just to clarify for our viewers, when you say a free rock climbing outing, do you mean free in terms of without the ropes and everything, or what do you mean?
No cost. Yeah, like
Okay,
really good
okay. I wanted to
instruction.
make sure I understood,
Yeah.
because there's
Well,
the two. I know you've done incredible free climbs, and I'm not a climber, but
well,
I'm familiar with it.
okay. Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's always good to clarify the terminology, because climbers say free climbing, and they actually mean they're using ropes, as opposed to free soloing, like the name of the movie, Free Solo, where you don't use ropes. So we free climb, we use the ropes the same way a trapeze artist uses a net. If we
Okay,
fall, we're using a safety system, but the point is to climb without weighting the gear. So
okay,
then if we weight the gear, that's called aid climbing. So aid climbing would be the opposite of free climbing. So we're just using our hands and feet and technique and balance and mental, focus and control, but we're putting in gear or using ropes. So yeah, no, my reference to free meant no charge, like
okay. I
climbing,
was
a
wondering if
lesson.
that's what
Yeah,
it was. Okay.
no, and it was so yeah, it was just I was so lucky to be at the right place at the right time, and then um I was just so into it that I actually became certified as an outing leader by the age of 15, which it's sort of funny to think back to the 70s. There were no waivers. Like I just showed up and like, I want to do it. I've climbed before, and they're like, "Okay, kid, tie in." And I was like, you know, they had to show me once, and I bought all the books, I studied, and I just I was almost like obnoxiously passionate about climbing as a little kid. Uh, in middle school, I was going to Yosemite every weekend, and by 15, by being a sophomore in high school, I was leading those trips every weekend to the
Incredible. Yeah.
mountains. And like I say, the lawyers in the Sierra Club would never tolerate that now, of course, but the world was different in the 70s.
Wow. Wow.
So, and really my life work in a sense was inspired, or I almost found purpose in high school because I'm in the mountains in the weekends, like facilitating, supporting, and witnessing this incredible transformative experience these people are having. So they're like beginners, we're teaching them, they're climbing, and it's just an incredible experience. Kind of opening the heart and mind, and it's for a lot of people it's like a first mindfulness experience because it's primal. Like you step off the ground, you are not thinking, you are your fingers and your toes are all that you're aware of, and you're clinging on for dear life. And we help you learn to relax and use good technique. But it's such an amazing experience. And then I would come back Monday morning and go, and I went to a really nice high school, but the PE, physical education, was still primitive like it is in the 70s, and or was, and kind of still is in a lot of ways. And they're like, do 10 push-ups, and you know these PE teachers are kind of channeling like the football coaches they saw the day before on Sunday TV or something. And and I went to this really intense college prep school for high school, and we did intensive college counseling, and I was telling my college counselors, like, I want to fix this. I want to transform physical education in America. This is lame. That, on weekends I see this beautiful transformation. Physical education should be that. It should be like something that opens my heart and mind and I'm inspired to do, and it changes me, not this boring stuff. So that was what I was expressing as, my vocational goal. And I wanted to go to college to study that, and I was well set up to do that. It was at this top prep school, but I was really into climbing. And at the age of 17, I was definitely in a handful of top climbers in the United States. I traveled across the country in my summer break, um, climbing some of the hardest routes. And I ended up taking what was supposed to just be a gap year before going to university. And because I'm like, I got climbs to do, I'm doing early ascents of some of the hardest routes in Yosemite. And my life trajectory really changed. I met an older woman who had a 19-month-old. I moved in with them. We bought a house. I started working for the Yosemite Mountaineering School. My colleagues elected me to be chief guide, and we got pregnant all while I was 19 years old. So
Right.
that
Lots going on.
a lot going on. So I was like, boom, adulting. But yeah, it was wonderful to be there. And Yosemite Mountaineering School is one of the top climbing schools in the world, and certainly in the top three in the U.S. back then. It was like the Tetons, the Exum School, Yosemite Mountaineering School, the Rainier Mountaineering School, and and it was great to keep doing that facilitative, you know, turning people on to this incredible transformative activity. And I still climbed. It was interesting as I was in before I became a dad. I was, the cohort of people was in are some of the famous, most successful professional climbers now. Conrad Anker, some are no longer alive, like Mug Stump, Alex Lowe. I was really close to all these guys, and but they weren't dads, and I was, and
Yeah.
so
Right.
I
Right.
I kept active, but um, I it was like, yeah, I'll climb in Yosemite. I'm not gonna make a career out of climbing in the high ranges right now while my kid is little. And it was definitely I mean, I have no regrets. I loved my life and career. And then when sport climbing happened, I was an early adopter because I had this it was like kind of the 86, 87, 88, and I had a 6-year-old, and going out climbing for the day used to be being gone all day. And when sport climbing first happened, I'm like, whoa, I can climb, 6 climbs and never be off the ground more than 20 minutes. So, and my son loves to come along and he can swing on the ropes, and he got really into climbing as a kid too. So I, I,
You got him in
had
at that age too. You
oh
started
yeah,
very young, and you got your son into it very young. Yeah,
and he's a
incredible.
climbing guide today. Yeah. He did a lot of climbing from, he quit when he um, became an adolescent. You can't do what your dad does. And I was like chief guide of the mountaineering school. He was born and raised in Yosemite. He became quite a skateboarder, really good
Hmm.
skateboarder. And I became a skateboard dad. Now
Okay.
Yosemite doesn't have that much pavement, but I started my first business, the climbing gym, down in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yes.
So he and all his buddies were just coming down all the time.
Tell us more about that indoor climbing gym, because I was reading about that, and I believe this was you were basically starting this, right? These didn't exist in the
It,
United States or elsewhere.
yeah, really, it was the first full service indoor climbing business in the world. It was technically the third gym. The first one was in Seattle, and it was a cool space, but it was very much like for a group of young, mostly men, to get strong fingers while it was raining. So they spent $15,000. I'm good friends with the founder there, Rich, and they glued rocks onto plywood, and it was neat. But I had and when I went to visit it, I already had my business plan and was active to start what we were doing. I came into it as a teacher, as a guide. I Somebody brought me photos of these sculptures in France. So for 2 years, the French government paid artists to make climbable sculptures, and they put them in some public parks and some schools. And I got photos of all those. And when I started, I didn't even use the word gym. I was like working on a business plan for youth programs with climbing, and I started doing really high-end corporate like team building. Remember back then ropes courses were happening, and we would take these leadership teams from business organizations, enterprises, and into use climbing as a team building communication um, activity. So I had those two business plans. I joined a few of my these famous friends of mine to make a guides co-op called Extreme Guiding International. And my mentor, he's a very well-known climber. He's no longer alive now, but Jim Bridwell, um, who I'd done I did a first ascent on El Capitan with him and a first ascent on
Incredible.
Half
Yeah.
Dome. And
Wow.
we guided an expedition in Alaska together, which also did a first ascent. And he brought these photos back to show me, and I was like, okay, I have these business plans. We're going to make sculptures. We're going to make like a warehouse full of these climbing surfaces, and it'll be like an institute of climb. Like I was into the transformative experience. So gym wasn't even in my idea, and that served me well because we spent $500,000. So and it was funny at the time, no one thought it would work in California. They're like, it makes sense in Seattle and Portland. That was the other one. It rains there all the time. Who would climb indoors in California? And I said, you don't get it. I'm not building something for my 20 friends and I to get strong fingers. I'm making this place that 10,000 8-year-old girls will try something they never dreamed of. That's what I'm doing. And that's what we did. And we ended up, organizing it like a gym. And we were in the first wave of using electronic funds transfer for memberships. But it was, we proved that concept of essentially we made a clean, well lit, well managed space for people to try climbing. But we still hosted, 5 national championships in a row. So it was a good place for the hardcore climbers. But our focus was really turning people onto
Right.
this activity for all the benefits.
Right.
And in a sense, we proved that market. Now there's thousands of these things all over. And
Yeah. No.
no, I did
Incredible.
not patent it. I did not, maybe there was a moment I strategically could have become the Joe Weider of indoor climbing, but I'm a pioneer of it. But the
Well,
classically, like a lot of pioneers, the well-funded MBAs come as a second wave, and
sure.
so I sold my
No,
gym to them, moved back to the mountains.
I think it's important for viewers to know too, and the purpose of this podcast is to try to find or talk about our common humanity too.
Mhm.
That none of us are truly superhuman. We all have breaking points depending on how much we have on our plate and what life throws at us. Sometimes it's well beyond what an individual can deal with at a given time. We always talk about people aren't weak, but they can be in a weakened state. And so for those trying to stigmatize people, it's not about weakness, but at any given time, there are people who are dealing with a ton of things and really deserve a hand up. So what I wanted to ask you a little bit about, Peter, is, you've talked about and been willing to share a little bit about, you've had some challenges yourself. And so, despite the fact that you can climb El Capitan, you've done free soloing, you've done things that may appear to be superhuman and in some ways are, you are like every single other person on the planet, a human being, right? So I don't know if there's some points that you'd like to share or observations about your own journey in that respect, and and trying to give a hand up to the listeners too, who may be dealing with tough times, because we're trying to again just trying to shatter stigma and encourage people.
Absolutely,
There's no shame to put your hand up to get a hand up, depending on
absolutely,
what's going
yeah,
on.
absolutely, yeah. So my it's very interesting. In 1992 or three, um, I ended up being diagnosed with, back then they just called it ADD, attention deficit disorder, and it was interesting, and that was kind of an inflection point. The book came out, Driven to Distraction by Dr. Ned Hallowell, and it sort of, I don't know what's the right word, trendy or something. It was like in the culture a lot, and it was interesting to go through that. I'd actually met my birth mother when I was 24, and she was a criminal defense investigator and defending death row inmates. And she actually flew back to Boston and interviewed Dr. Ned Hollowell. They were using it as a part of this defense, and she's like, "Whoa, my first son is like this, not a convicted felon, but just having those attributes of that get clustered into a certain framework called ADD." So yeah, she gave me all this stuff to read, and it was interesting. And I saw a psychiatrist, I did all this testing. I was offered medication. I took it for a while, but in hindsight, I I work in this field, and millions of kids are getting this diagnosis, and it is fascinating. We did these specialized rock climbing camps, and so many of the like one year, I think 65% of out of the 24 kids in our climbing camp were all, their moms dropped them off for 8 days with all their meds, and we're like, wow, kids with ADD find their way to rock climbing. Isn't that fascinating? And certainly a number of some of those famous colleagues, um, we all could, it's very common that people with that characteristic um, are attracted to these like really intense athletic experiences because it's so focusing to be rock climbing or to be extreme skiing or to be skateboarding or all these things. So that was interesting. But then I had, like any entrepreneur, there's wins, there's losses. I had some extreme stress in that climbing gym. I just tossed that off a minute ago, like, oh, the well-funded MBAs. Well, I made that sound just like a matter of course. It was intense drama. I had partnered with this thing. I got kicked out of a deal. I lost 30% of my customer base in one day when what was supposed to be, our second gym became somebody else's gym, and they took out, blah, blah, blah. And, now in hindsight, it's like, what's the big deal? It's just a freaking business. But at the time, I was so identified with it. I was only, my early 30s. I was kind of famous for it. I'd been in the Wall Street Journal and on TV all the time, and an Outside magazine, and so I was just overly identified with it, and it crushed me. And I had somewhere in there, in hindsight, I know that I had like a manic episode. There is a concerning thing of people taking the stimulants of ADD medication and then having like their first manic episode. Hard to say causation or correlation, but I had it and did not get diagnosed, and I had this severe depression afterwards, and I sought treatment for the depression, and this happened to me another time, but with a few years in between, really intense stress and leading up to it. The other piece that I experienced with this was as the stress would build up and I would kind of ramp up in my energy, I would also start smoking a ton of cannabis, a ton of pot. And then in 2004, it happened the third time, and it was really extreme, and it lasted like 4 months, and it was really destructive. I had a relationship that was a great relationship, um, and it was like I took a flamethrower to my life, and there was a lot going on at the time, stressors, and I sought treatment from an amazing doctor, psychiatrist, and it was the first time, even though it was my third time, it was the first time like, okay, this is the diagnosis. It's called bipolar, and he gave me some wonderful books to read by K. Redfield Jameson, Touched with Fire, um, and that was great. And I really wanted treatment because the downside of a manic episode is very dangerous. And I was like, whoa, I was so far up there for 4 months that I might not survive this. So I was grateful for the treatment. My business had gone away, my relationship had gone away. I moved out of town, um, and that was the close of my second business, and it was an amazing experience. I want to say two things about it. One, my second business also was very prominent. I had done this thing on the border of Yosemite and kind of innovated a eco tours in the park, and um, also had a lot of school groups, which ended up becoming my third business. But I was even like head of the town council in our little border town, and I got fired from that job while like I gave a speech, in a really spun up state. Some
Mm.
people love the speech and like, you're speaking truth to power, but other people are like, whoa, you should see a doctor, dude. You're talking too fast and something's wrong. So, and that is a hallmark of mania, is it can be an incredible creative time as well. In fact, as I was kind of coming down, I really visualized what my next work would be. So I took that on. Okay, that's my diagnosis. Okay, that is what happened to me, two other times over the previous decade. And I survived that depression state phase. But an
Did
interesting thing. Oh, sorry, I wanted to say one thing of two. One was the experience of, it was very public. Like I say, I was on a stage giving a speech to my whole community where my kids were raised. I knew all the parents, and I was clearly not well. And everyone knew that, I sold the business and left town, and everyone knew that I'd gotten that diagnosis. And I felt all this like intense embarrassment and shame and like, oh my gosh. And I had the experience of my friends, my community still loved me. Like I came back, and I met with some, like the guy who fired me was the county supervisor. And he's like, you are not fit to be the town head of the town council. And I went for a walk with him, and he was just like, yeah, Peter, but people get sick, and I could tell,
Yep.
I worked with
Right.
you for 4 years, and something was really bad happening with you, and and here you are now. You seem a lot better. Yay, have a hug, and we so value you as a member of this community. And that was profound, just to be like, wow, like I could, you know, um, have this experience very publicly and still be like embraced by my community. That meant that I just I still remember how that felt in my body even as I'm telling the story. So that was
Oh,
one thing. Yeah, go ahead.
oh, sorry. I just wanted to say it, and I don't want to interrupt you, but that's such an important story you're sharing, because again, I think for a lot of people, the self-talk that keeps them, put up, and being ashamed of certain things or being afraid of certain things and afraid of the stigma. Hearing stories like that, when people realize we are all human, if you do need some treatment, if you need help, you know, talking to somebody that cares about you, and then and sometimes we lose people, sometimes we lose friendships and all sorts of things, obviously, but that's the healing journey. And so what you're sharing is so important. And so sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to
No
just say
problem.
that.
Yeah, no, thanks. It really yeah, it was huge for me to feel that, and I um to yeah, to experience that. And then another thing happened, which is like a year, like so I took, this medication and kept studying all about bipolar. About a year later, I I look back on my history and it's like, okay, I've never. Well, let me stop by. I'm going to say something first, which is we all humans are unique, and all humans' brains are unique, and all our histories are unique. And I'm sharing an experience that I had. I do not. I'm also, a very experienced paraprofessional in mental health care now. So I I do not project my experience out onto anyone else, so it's just my experience. But it worked for me, and it inspired me to to pivot in my life work. So I look back on my history and I was like, I've never like been mood swingy. I've just had these three events, like really clear, circumstantial stress just building up, and smoking a ton of pot, and ramping up my energy, not sleeping, talking too fast, moving quick, but also writing a bunch of things, getting a lot of work done, and to a harmful degree, self, like just yeah. I barely avoided getting like arrested and hospitalized in 2004. I mean, at one point I was surrounded in the middle of the Oakland airport by law enforcement, and luckily I just was like, I calmed right down and talked my way out of it. But, maybe it would have been good, but I sort of was clever enough to avoid. Maybe there's another incident too, but that was like came really close
Yeah,
to
right.
getting arrested and hospitalized. But I, wrote it out. I did have some really good friends who did give me the kind of support that it meant a lot to me. They're still really good friends, and said like, see a doctor, buddy, smoke less pot, see a doctor.
Right.
Um, so a year later, I had kind of analyzed my own history and I was like, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try to really manage stress. I'm also going to commit to sobriety. Like I just never need to smoke pot again. I um I know my whole life I've had this relationship with nature, at least since I was 6 years old, but probably before that, playing naturally the way kids do. But since I was six, a pretty deep relationship with nature. So I'm like, I'm going to manage stress. I'm going to make sure I do what I do, immersed in nature. I do what I do with my embodied peak experience, skiing, climbing. Um, and I have a network of support. My friends and family know that this could happen to me, and I will never forget that this can happen to me. But I went back to the doctor and I said, I I'd like to try this. I'd like to try, I'm going to set aside this diagnosis. I'll never forget that I have that potential. But and I'd like to come off the medication because I'm going to commit to sobriety, to managing stress, to having friends and family who know this about me, kind of have my back. And he said, "Yeah, I'll support you in that." and I've heard this from a number of doctors, just acquaintance doctors, that like, yeah, everyone wants to do that, and most relapse. And but it worked for me, and I haven't had I've been symptom free since 2004, so it's like 21
We,
years now.
yeah, no, well, congratulations. It's a huge deal.
And I know it's tricky when somebody's manic, they feel really good. They don't want to slow down. They're like, I'm getting so much done. I'm writing poetry. I'm kicking ass, taking names. And but I have a circle of people that, are empowered to at least, you know, try to stop me and tell me it's happening again. And I watch that myself. Yeah. So I've also been a student of the mental health issues common with entrepreneurs.
Yes, right.
I was privileged to work with Michael Freeman, who's like one of the world experts at that, a psychiatrist who's made that his research work, um, and it is fascinating. But that, like I say, I don't project that out. I don't when I meet
Right.
somebody who says they're bipolar, I don't say like, "Oh, this is what I did," and I
Yes,
recommend it.
absolutely. Oh, no.
Although I do share, not encourage, I do share that nature, exercise, sobriety,
Absolutely.
um, and community and purpose
Yes.
are really useful supports. And in fact, we created a program to sort of focus those elements to be a treatment modality. We're not supposed to say we provide treatment. We should do treatment supports, but kids experienced treatment
Yep.
from those modalities. I'm very careful of the language because we're clinically supervised paraprofessionals. But anyway, I toward the end, back to the purpose issue, as I was coming down from that mania, those best friends that supported me, um, I was like, I want my work in the future to really be helping young people with mental health struggles, and that's what I'm going to do. And and that is what I do, and what we built in my third business.
Amazing.
Thanks for
Well,
listening to my
I
story.
want oh no. Well, it's super important for people to hear. I agree with you 1,000% also, and I think we can share our stories and then share different frameworks. And to the extent that's helpful for people, then that's fantastic. At the end of the day, we're on our own journeys, but we need these reference points, and we can use a hand up, and we can't do it alone. So I wanted to ask you. You've covered, given shared a lot of information, intimate information. Appreciate that about your own journey, and you are a renaissance man. I love on your LinkedIn page, for example. I want to ask you, you're walking between two mountains somewhere. You know,
Oh, that's not me. That's not me.
oh,
That's my
that's
son.
oh, that's your son. Well,
My son is an amazing. That's called slackline walking,
okay.
and so that's my photo of I'm a father, but
Well,
yeah, that's my son. But
incredible.
I've guided that those mountains. That's called the Mathis Crest. That's
Okay,
in Tuolumne Meadows, where the mountaineering school is based every summer. So that's like
incredible.
our soul terrain. But that's him, and he's incredible at slackline walking. And I cannot
Yeah,
even
that's
touch.
quite something.
Terrible at slackline walking. He's really good at it.
Right.
He's an
Well,
equilibrist. And he's a wonderful climbing guide and instructor and facilitator of nature experiences for people. He's
incredible
super
to
good
see
at it.
that. I wanted to ask you also if you want to share a bit more detail for a few minutes on, talking about the Gateway Mountain Center, whatever you'd like to share about the
Yeah,
kids that you've helped there, how it works, and anything else, if you'd like to,
yeah,
and also Nature Up Health
sure.
to give a bit more detail, because your story is incredibly inspirational, and it's so important for people to hear again that even somebody who can climb El Capitan, is not immune to challenges in life, and but these other programs that you've done have helped so many
Yeah.
people, and whatever you'd like to
I'll,
talk about.
s- yeah, thanks. I'll say one last sort of sentence or short paragraph around the whole framework of mental illness. I think that there is a future where we will um, conceptualize these things differently. And I like back to that ADHD issue. I'm seriously disturbed by how many kids get this diagnosis and then have a like a self-esteem sort of wet blanket put over them when they're like 9 years old. And it's just so contextual. So I was privileged. I got to go to Waldorf school as a little kid, and then, I was in these really groovy alternative ed kind of spaces and prep school. And I never, I got to be celebrated for what I was good at. You know, no one said you don't sit still very well. I think if I had been a kid today, I just would have been, diagnosed and felt made to feel bad by being who I was. So I do, like, if you think of the attributes of a world-class mountaineering guide, it's somebody who keeps a field of awareness, takes in all the detail, like is distracted by the shift of the wind, the crunch of the snow underfoot, the kid 3 kids back who stumbled for the second time. So I turn around and put my hand on his shoulder and he doesn't sprain his ankle as he walks down the hill. These are, that in that context, that wiring is great. But yeah, when I had to do payroll for 25 people, when my general manager left the job, I was like, give me stimulants to take. Oh my gosh, I cannot do payroll for 25 people. So some of these things are really contextual. And the last thing I'll say is I'm a big fan of Dr. Peter Kellerman in England. There's a paper he published called Imagine There's No Diagnosis. It's Easy If You Try. And this is a framework to consider. Any human, given a certain combination of stressors, can become symptomatic. And if there's enough stressors, and it can become symptomatic in a spectrum from depression, anxiety, mania, hearing voices. And I think it is problematic that our healthcare system has made this type of suffering so medicalized. And I think the answer to that from these British psychiatrists is we have to support people with the context of what was stressing them, what are their life circumstances, what is happening. To just think it's like a brain chemistry imbalance
Yeah,
that
right,
we can treat just with medication
right.
is not going to be as effective. And so I just think there's a bright future of enough people innovating and moving our treatment culture into a different place. Because honestly, even with the real foundation, I mean, what most excites me is investment in innovation. Just more of the same, more psychiatry, more clinics, more
Yep.
medication is not going to do it. We need some new frameworks, um, and purpose is huge. In any case that I've been involved with a youth, even a little guy or gal, you know, as they start to heal, like helping them find, with all the kids we work with, we do a core gift interview. And it's like, that's how they find like the gift they can give to the world. It's this beautiful
Beautiful.
process. So yeah, so back to the work. Thank you for asking. 19 years ago, I started what's called Gateway Mountain Center. And we started with environmental ed programs up at Donner Summit, and we're just like 2.5 to 3 hours from the whole Bay Area. So huge market. We're right off Donner Summit's right off Highway 80, very easy to get to, but from sea level up to 7,100 feet, we would call it in the US, 2,100 meters.
Mhm.
Maybe a little more than that, 2,260 or
20,
something.
yeah.
Um, um, I always have to look it up. I'm good at meters when I cross country
I always
ski,
think of it as about 3
yeah.
feet and a meter, about I think so.
Uh, Yeah, and you say about, and so so anyway, I love Canada. So yeah, what's interesting is that we built up this very robust program using the Sierra Club Lodge, which I stayed at when I was 12 years old, up here at Donner Summit, this beautiful lodge, and an incredible terrain and year round, like snow trips, and from 2006 to 2011, it was all about STEM. That was like the movement in American education: science, technology, engineering, math. So we were doing rigorous STEM outdoors, STEM in the meadows, STEM in the forest, STEM on the cliffs. And but by 2011, we really noticed this significant uptick in how many kids we're on medication for psychiatric conditions, for anxiety, for depression. And it's interesting now, all these books are out, The Anxious Generation. Everyone's taking a retrospective look back to 2000, about 2011, which is, you know, correlating with, the ubiquity of the iPhone and social media, first kids dealing with that. There's a lot of other issues too, though. So we were motivated. The state of California put out these grant rounds for innovation. And we thought, and so this is where now's my chance, like I had this experience just, 8 years ago. I knew that what we were doing with kids already was building resilience, connecting to nature, getting them, having these amazing experiences in their physical experiences in nature. But the state said, we want to fund new experiments in mental health care. This money can't go into the existing system. So we created this program, Whole Hearts, Minds, and Bodies, it's a mouthful, clinically supervised, nature-based therapeutic mentoring. And what we didn't expect or anticipate in the original business planning was that the very first kids that were referred to us from school psychologists would be the highest need kids in our community. So um, like kids who had had multiple psychiatric hospitalizations, kids, coming out of foster care who are in foster care, kids with serious substance issues. And that just, when we started, in a sense, like the system of care was, in rural California, it was so fragmented and inconsistent. These school psychologists are like, please try to help this kid. Because we worked with these kids with really severe suffering, and we had some pretty spectacular successes, outcomes with these kids. We went from a government-funded like startup experiment to a full service contract with our county behavioral health department in about 18 months. And that was unheard of because the kids we were working with were like on everybody's radar, and the county people knew all their names because they're like, oh my gosh, we've sent that kid to 10 hospitalizations. I mean, even fiscally, like how much does the county spend to send a kid to 10 psychiatric hospitalizations? A lot, right? Like $400,000 or something. So because of that success, and when we started, we were just like, there was no charge. We just um, our intake criteria was severity. After a while, we're like, this, every kid could use a wonderful therapeutic mentor, but we're reserving this for the kids who are debilitated by symptoms. So in the American system, um, in behavioral health, they would say they were classified as severe or moderate severe, which is like severe minus, or in school settings, they would be requiring tier 3 supports. So these are the kids that the school psychologist is spending 80% of their time with this handful of kids. These are kids, little kids who, like, there's, let me just say, the common history of these kids was early childhood trauma and or complex trauma, or developmental trauma disorder would be the proper diagnostic term, but that is not a proper diagnostic term. That's the more accurate way to say it. But they all had diagnoses of like conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, borderline personality disorder. And I can be really critical of the medicalized system of care, but we partnered skillfully with it, or sometimes I say we infiltrated it, because we became so appreciated by the county systems that they coached us to become Medi-Cal certified, which is Medicaid in California. And so we probably were the smallest agency ever to achieve that. And to this date, as far as I know, in the US, we're the only program like that that got Medicaid to reimburse us. So it's a really robust methodology. We developed a whole treatment framework called 4 Roots for Growing a Human. And I'll just say the roots. Root number 1 is authentic relationship. The essence of the program is we pick the kid up from school, single, one-on-one. spend 3 or 4 hours with them, essentially all afternoon. Yes, we try to be in nature, but we help those young people access what they're interested in. I've taken kids to welding class. I've taken kids to music studios. But we're like, oh yeah, I'll take you to that music studio. We're going to do a walk in these trees first. And we teach them, like, look at the leaves shimmering. Close your eyes. Can you pick out 3 different bird songs? Let's take our shoes off and walk barefoot in this forest. Like, and again, working with these kids that are Medicaid eligible, meaning they come from low income backgrounds, they've been heavily medicated. There's a lot of obesity. These are not like ski team kids taking Ritalin. These are kids who, seriously not only suffered from mental health issues from the traumatic exposure and how they trigger, um, when they encounter stressors in the moment. They've also suffered from the system of care of, you know, these class of antipsychotics that were really popular for pediatricians to just prescribe for some years have been proven now to cause rapid weight gain. So route number 1 is authentic relationship because we're with them all afternoon. Route number 2 is connecting to nature. And there's beautiful new books, a book out right now called Nature and the Mind by Mark Berman. I keep giving it away. I've given away 15 copies in the last 6 weeks. And I keep buying it. It's an incredible book. He's on podcasts all the time now. And it's all the neuroscience of what it does for your brain to be in nature, with some serious studies on people with major depressive disorder and really strong positive outcome indicators from just like 20 minutes a day doing this. Route number 3 is embodied peak experience. And this is really important to us. We say we do forest bathing, but we do forest cartwheels and forest tree climbing. And we find the rough ground. We find the logs and the rocks. And this is what we're doing. We're getting the kids into this kind of risk space that is appropriate. We might hold the kid's hand while they're traversing the log, but we do that week after week. We look for that rough ground. Essentially, to speak in technical terms, we're activating the vestibular, the proprioceptive, the sensory motor. And there's some really interesting research. A lab not too far from you in Ontario, next province over, is Dr. Ruth Lanius has done a lot of research on the vestibular system. She's done a lot of brain scans on adults who had childhood trauma. And what they're finding really supports what we observe in the field. Because that kid, I was holding their hand. 2 months later, they're like, I don't need your hand. 4 months later, like, watch how fast I can run across this log,
Fantastic.
jump to that rock, ricochet across the creek banks. And as they are improving, as their embodied confidence improves, as their kinetic expression, as they get more balance skills, they're in their body, they feel more what is it? I can't remember the word. There's interoceptive, exteroceptive. Those things are woken up. They are able to regulate their emotions so much better. They're able to face setbacks and challenges and have more resilience. They literally change their posture. They literally make more eye contact with other people. They were kind of slumped down in this beat down affect, and now they stand tall. And it's profound. And we actually have a research grant to track that over a year of treatment. So that's route number 3. Route number 4 is helping others.
Yes,
Connecting to community through service. That is helping them find purpose.
Very good.
So I know I've talked too long and probably used up all the time.
No. I think it's I'm really glad we've had a chance to have this chat. We've covered a lot of ground, and you've done so many things in your life, and you're helping tons of people. I mean, I think of it like, progress is key for all of our mental health. Just sometimes it's not necessarily, the the great medal, but the improvement along the way and the journey. And if people are if people are engaging in that, then it's very satisfying, and it is a piece of the puzzle. But I think the four pillars you're talking about are super strong. It makes tons of sense, and it'd be nice if more kids had the opportunity to be in programs like the ones that you've set up. So, Peter, I wanted to ask you if there's any other thoughts you'd like to share, covering any of these topics, or just, addressing some of the people that are listening, maybe that themselves are kind of caught up in being pinned in their own circumstances by different challenges now. Or if there's, again, anything else you'd like to talk about. And then hopefully I'm going to see you again sometime, maybe out skiing, although you won't necessarily be skiing with me, but maybe with my son someday, because I know you both share the passion for great skiing.
Jeff, I love skiing at any pace. I can take care of myself to go hard up a hill anytime. So it's my joy to go out with people and, do a lap and catch you and enjoy skiing with you, and then go off and do another lap. I love skiing with people at any pace, because I have plenty of time to go as fast and as hard as I need to be a racer. Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed this. Well, I'll start with a little bit about just a little bit on the current project, but then
Yes, absolutely, go for it.
I love your invitation to those who might find use in some of our methods. I think I can share a little bit. So two things are going on. Like Gateway Mountain Center actually has this amazing opportunity to take a historic lodge in the Sierra and make it a nature healing center, and we got funding from the state of California to do this. And we need to raise some more funding, because of course we wrote the grant 3 years ago. Construction costs have gone way up. But it's a recovery retreat. The idea for programming is recovery retreat. So after a young person comes out of the hospital, and I think, a lot of your listeners, and I know you yourself, like a lot of people have had this experience, what happens after? And so our idea is the first 10 days of every month for anyone in Northern California from probably 16 to 24 years old could come up and have this recovery retreat, and with all the supports needed, but all the methods that we are so experienced at delivering: nature sensory, embodied peak experience. But there will be group work. We're certified in this beautiful curriculum called mindfulness-based substance abuse treatment. I think they need to change their name, but it's also a great curriculum, even if substances aren't involved, in just mindful awareness and how we connect with others. And we're really excited about that. It's going to be a construction project for a while, but there'll be stuff on my website. The other piece, as a consultant now, I'm trying to take the work out into the world. So this nature-based therapeutic mentoring, the new brand name now is called Nature Up Therapeutic Mentoring, or Nature Up, Therapeutic Mentoring. And it's a system and a package that we can license to another agency, and train, help them hire and train and figure out how to get reimbursed by Medicaid, by the US public health system. Could do this in Canada too. But we really believe in it and want to see it spread to other areas. And it actually, we'd really like to see it in big cities. Because it just, every big city has wonderful parks, really. And it doesn't take much. We don't need to be in capital B, capital N, big nature. It can be, the little stream in the cul-de-sac, and the leaves in a park, and the trees in a park. So really excited about that. And we've invested a lot in the training platform. So like with video libraries and making this really robust kind of medical grade training system. So check that's on my website, natureuphealth.com. And then to those who are suffering, like every human suffers some, and when stress gets to that point where people have serious suffering from these symptoms of mental illness, it is finding a way to be connected to others. And it's so hard. I know with severe depression, it's like a solo place. Like people get so, internal, and and alone in it. And it's always works to connect. And hopefully efforts like yours help, more people out in the world be, to like lower stigma and normalize that we can all help each other and be there
Yep.
for each other. And
Mhm.
that's super important. And then, yeah, I'm always going to promote nature. You don't have to even find the tree in your yard if you need to, but that exposure um, on a daily basis, like really, if somebody is super depressed or anxious or manic, like take that in. Our brains evolved to be fed that way, to have a mutuality with the sensorium of nature, with the complexity of it. Um, and then exercise, and everyone says
Yep.
this, like exercise actually, is equal to or better than antidepressants in a number of studies. So, and I know it's hard. Like when I was depressed, um, that was the hallmark, is I didn't feel like moving my body anymore.
Mhm, mhm.
And I would take the treatment just until I would start bouldering again, and then I would stop the medication and start bouldering. The doctors didn't like that, but it's exercise is so key, and just a little bit every day and build upon it. But and again, when a lot of people say exercise, I love your analogy of the bench press. I'm going to use the climbing analogy, like find a belayer who's got your rope and move your body outside, and uphill's good for you. um,
Absolutely.
bench presses are great too, but when people say exercise and they hit a
Yep.
treadmill, it's much more interesting to walk. and
Sure.
and
Oh
then
yeah.
challenge the balance centers, like walk on rough ground, get off the trail, and bushwhack a little bit. It's really good for you, and we've just seen such good results doing that with young people. And I mean, I'm hanging out with my 94-year-old mom in a wheelchair, and I
Amazing.
take her on nature adventures in her wheelchair.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, no, and for me, just to say that the bench press is just the metaphor of getting eventually not being able to, carry the heavy loads we carry. I agree with you 1,000% to be out in nature. I mean, I'm fortunate today. I've been in the country and I saw 3 deer running around and just watched them. And, um, but Peter, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for the work that you're doing and continuing to doing. I hope some of our listeners will reach out to you to learn more about Nature Up Health and maybe get involved in different ways if they can, and others take your story and your messages to give, which will give them a hand up, and remind them there's never any shame to put their hand up and reach out, because as you say, it's the connection, it's community, people care, and we need to hear more stories like yours and others, just to remind people that nobody's superhuman, but we all try to celebrate our lives, but there are times when we need a hand up. So thank you so much, Peter, and it's great to talk to you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it, and thank you for your what you're doing with the Pin to Purpose mission. I love it.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye.